Relaxing waves there. But if you can't get to the beach, there are other ways of raising those serotonin levels, as my next guest will tell you. Sarmado Sibley is a chef who trained in Michelin-starred kitchens, but is now known around the world as a leader in the field of plant-based food. His signature approach is to combine the power of superfoods with the wisdom of natural medicine on the plate. And today he's here to tell us of the transformational properties of fermented foods and their role in gut health. So, Sarmado, gut health, why is that so important to us?
Thank you for asking that question. I think it's so important because at the moment, specifically now at the moment, our immunity, staying strong with the food that we put in our bodies is going to help us thrive. And the gut is optimal in terms of our well-being. You know, it's known in Asia as the second brain. Everything that we put into the gut will send a signal to the brain. Everything that we put into the gut is going to affect our emotions. How we deal with the world, how we deal with our emotions will all relate to the food and the support that we give to our stomachs.
That's it's quite scary on one level if you think about it. So, and we've ignored our gut for so many years, haven't we? It's not the thing that we think about. If we think about gut health, I mean, maybe eating a yogurt up until now has been most people's idea of gut health, but it's far more than that, isn't it?
Yeah, far, far more. I mean, just when you were talking then, I remembered that when I was much younger, perhaps early teens, there used to be these drinks that came out, and they were little shots that you could buy from the supermarket. Everybody thought that they were having this beneficial bacteria that they were swallowing to help them feel good. But actually it was loaded with sugar, and it was actually a very sweet drink with very little probiotic. It is something that really deserves to be treated with some respect because it does affect everything that's happening in our lives.
So, what can we do to improve our gut health? What is it that we need to be doing?
Well, there's lots of foods that you can be adding into the diet. I mean, now we can see that in the shops, the health food stores, and online, we can buy drinks like kefir, kombucha. There's the fermented vegetables like sauerkraut and the Korean fermented cabbage with chili, the kimchi.
My favourite. I love
There's
kimchi.
so good. It's
Mm.
so good. And our ancestors knew that that was one of the best ways to eat was by incorporating fermented foods into your diet. So it's not just about buying the jars of the sauerkraut and eating it with a spoon or, you know, these foods were used as an accompaniment to also help digest the rich, fatty, heavy foods. So
Y-
on top of that, you know, like now we've got the glut of tomatoes coming. It's the end of the growing season. You could be making fermented tomato sauces that will keep in a jar in the fridge or in the cupboard through the winter months. And then the other answer to your question, Jen, about what we can do now is use a very good probiotic. And there's some that you can buy in the stores that are vegan and that are inexpensive, where you can have a 30-day supply just to balance that intestinal flora and your microbiome.
What kind of effect do you feel it has on you? Just to explain to people who maybe are thinking, well, yeah, but so what? Second brain, what does that mean? When you're eating more fermented food and you're looking after your gut flora, how does that affect you physically and
Mm,
mentally?
yeah, that's a good one, especially now, the mentally in these times. Because if we're eating a lot of processed foods or manufactured foods or things like wheat, white wheat, let's say, that's been sprayed with a lot of chemicals, then when we make that bread or when those noodles are made or that cake, it's basically flour and water, which is very gluey. What happens, we digest it, that goes into the lining of the gut. That then stops our ability to absorb the nutrients, the minerals, and the enzymes that go into our body. So that can affect you in many ways. I mean, brain fog is a big one. And if you're constantly eating a lot, particularly the white processed wheat products, that's going to affect your brain chemistry. And, you know, things like serotonin and tryptophan, they are harder to produce if you're not giving the right fuel for those things to then start accumulating in the brain. And those things, when they are working, or when, you know, when you have got that serotonin and tryptophan, your outlook on life becomes a lot more positive and optimistic. When we're feeling optimistic and positive, then we actually break out of the situation that we're in and want to do something for ourselves, like exercise or yoga or meditation or a walk on the beach. We want to be out in nature and connecting with people because we feel that aliveness coming back into the body. That is what you get when you start putting the good things into the gut. And that act of going out to do your run, to do your yoga, the morning walk on the beach, that's coming from you having that positive outlook. If you're permanently putting the processed foods into the gut, which your body can't really digest very well, those chemicals that we should be getting and want to be feeling are inhibited. They're not going there. So we're not feeling that happy. So the chances of us going out and having that walk or that run or that yoga become a lot slimmer. So it's like a knock-on effect. First you feel good, and then you get up and you do something about it. And then the dopamine starts happening and you want to repeat the process again and again. So then your energy levels are improved. So it's like a win-win situation.
Yeah, it sounds great. And I know when I go for a walk on the beach, I always feel far better, more positive. As I was just explaining earlier in a little piece that I recorded down on the beach, it's so good for you. But then, of course, the other side to that is what we actually put into our bodies. And this is where you're coming from. That's how we get the optimum effect, I suppose, in our health. It's we look at what's going on outside our bodies, and we look at exercise and all that sort of thing, but also what we're putting into our bodies. What is it specifically in fermented food that really enhances our systems, if I can put it that way?
So what happens if you're fermenting something like a cabbage?
Yeah.
And you're breaking that cabbage down and you're shredding it really, really finely. When you put the salt onto that cabbage, it starts breaking down the cellulose in that cabbage and liquid starts coming out of it. When you press that cabbage then into a jar and the liquid starts coming above the cabbage, and you put pressure on that cabbage to stay beneath the liquid for a time period, what happens? The enzymes in that cabbage or whatever vegetable you're going to use, you can use others to ferment, but it actually breaks down the fiber in that vegetable. And then what happens? You have the microorganisms starting to feed from the salt, from that enzyme breaking down process. And then what happens in the fermentation is that you get microbes of healthy bacteria, which only increase and improve in time. There was a renowned Dr. Mercola who created an amazing probiotic. And he himself said on a podcast that when you make your own fermented foods, they not only have millions of beneficial bacteria, but trillions, far higher than you'd even find in my best supplement, because there is the energy of the person being transmitted into that food as well.
Wow.
Whereas with the probiotic, it's a generic manufactured product. Wow. Whereas the fermented food, there's a symbiosis between you and your food.
Well, I've made my own kimchi and my own fermented cabbage, sauerkraut and kefir, in fact. And I never thought of it that way before, that there's this kind of symbiotic relationship. So this is real transformation on a completely different scale in terms of the food that we eat.
Yeah, it's huge. It really does affect us mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually when we start putting those foods into our bodies. whether it's the kimchi, the sauerkrauts, the kefirs, or just that healthy probiotic. You know, some of these cultures, let's say sourdough bread, where you're using some of the ancient grains, which do have minerals and vitamins in them. When you start fermenting those, which is what our ancestors would be doing, that process breaks down a lot of the gluten that's in that flour, because when you have a very good sourdough, let's say.
Wow, I didn't realise that either. See, I learn something every time I speak to you, Sarmado. Where's a good place to start? Have you got a recipe or something that you can give us? How do we make our own?
That's a brilliant question, because if you go in a shop, a lot of it, because initially you can buy kefir in the frozen cabinet in the supermarket, and it's a dairy kefir, and you can buy kefir drinks, you know, not dairy kefir drinks, but like sparkling,
The water kefir.
like water kefir, yeah. And you can buy kombuchas, and you can buy a lot of fermented products. But the funny thing is, sometimes, like the kefir that you'll see in the supermarket, it's pasteurized, and which kind of defeats the object of fermentation, because fermentation is a very raw process. It's alive, it's bubbling. It's like having a laboratory in your kitchen. It's kind of fizzing away, and it's got a life of its own, and that's fascinating, you know. Then you start to feel alive. Kefir is a wonderful one to start with, just in terms of, if you get some water kefir grains, which you can buy on websites, just search water kefir grains. When you make water kefir the first time, if you had 2 tablespoons of kefir grains, when you make that 1 litre water recipe, every time the kefir grains are expanding and they're getting higher and higher, and the volume of the kefir grains in the jar just grows exponentially. After 2 days, 3 days, you probably got double the amount. Well, when you see that happening, that's exactly what's happening in your gut. And when you've got a healthy gut, 2/3 of it are full of intestinal flora. And that's where we want to get to. So recipes, one of the favorites in the beginning, when I was sharing about fermented foods, because it's got to taste sexy, it's got to taste really nourishing, and it's got to look good. Because otherwise, if it's just a jar of this kind of cranky looking cabbage, you aren't going to kind of warm to it. But cashew cheese, or fermented cashew cheese, is a good one to start with. So 2 cups of raw, unroasted cashew nuts that you can buy in the health food store. Take 2 cups of those cashew nuts, put them in a bowl of water, preferably filtered or spring water, and leave them to soak for 8 hours. After 8 hours, wash them off in a sieve, and then put those cashew nuts in a high-speed blender with 1 capsule of probiotic. Just open the capsule. Don't put the whole thing in. Just break it. Just mentioning that. Just so the powder comes out. 1/3 of a cup of water, again, filtered or spring. Put the lid on and turn it up on high until it's all smooth and creamy, almost like yogurt consistency. And then pour the contents in a bowl and cover it with a piece of parchment paper overnight in a warm place in the kitchen. When you wake up in the morning, that cashew mixture is going to be fluffy. It's going to be bubbly. It's going to smell slightly sour.
Wow. Yeah.
You can either turn that bubbly cashew mixture into yogurt by adding a little sweetener of your choice, maple syrup, coconut sugar, a little bit of vanilla powder, lemon juice. You've got yourself a nice cashew yogurt to have with your granola. Or sprinkle some nutritional yeast, a little bit of sea salt, whisk that in, maybe a bit of black pepper, pop that in the fridge, and then you've got yourself some nice cream cheese to have.
Wow, it's that easy.
Yeah, super, super easy. And it feels light. You're not going to have that bloating that you probably have if you were to eat the same quantity of kind of unpasteurized dairy. It's quite light, it's fluffy, it's got loads of probiotic in it, and your belly will love you for it.
Fantastic. And not only your belly, but your entire system, by the sounds of it. It really will help you transform into being a much more positive and active person. Would you say that? Or is that taking it a bit too far?
No, absolutely. Absolutely, definitely. Because the thing is, the role of the fermentation will always change, because it is an experiment. Whatever fermentation recipe is going to work best for you. Maybe it's cashew cheese, maybe it's sauerkraut, maybe it's the tomato salsa. But your experience of life becomes far greater, because an analogy I give is that when people go to a restaurant, when they finish their meal, literally, watch, most of the time the waiter or waitress will take that plate away really quickly and give you the dessert menu, because they want to sell you the dessert. And your instant reaction is, oh my God, I want that, and that. And you order straight away. If you were to take that menu from the waiting staff and just sit there for 20 minutes before ordering, that's how long it's going to take your belly or your gut to tell your brain that it's had enough to eat.
Wow, yeah.
So that in itself is going to help your experience of life much better, because you're no longer going to be having those emotions or guilt around having all the sugar and the dairy, and perhaps not the best ingredients that are going to make you feel a little bit stuffed, or, or help if you want to lose weight. Everything that goes into the gut is going to benefit you, because the healthy foods are going to give you the serotonin, the tryptophan, the feel-good chemicals firing off in the brain. And the other things, like the processed foods and the manufactured foods with loads of sugar, well, they have lots of side effects to them as well. But that's basically what you're lining your gut with. So every choice is like, do I want to feel happy or do I want to feel heavy?
Fantastic. I have to say, I could listen to you talk about food all day long. We'll leave it there, but I would love to speak to you again about other food-related issues. But for now, Sarmado, thank you so much. That is also a great recipe for cashew cheese. I'm going to go away and try it myself now. And hopefully we will catch up another time and get some more tips and information about food. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jen. It's been a pleasure, as always.
Great information from chef and coach Sarmado Sibley there. You can find out more at his website, sarmadosibley.com. That's S for sugar, ARMADO, Sibley, SIBLEY.com. Details will also be in the show description. Well, that's all for today. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Join me again for fantastic guests and more Alchemy 101. For now, though, I'll let the nightingale have the last word.